elementary age students would generally be able to participate on school sports teams consistent with their gender identity.
No, please, no filibustering. Biological women are different from biological men physically. This is a simple question for an educator. You're not going to answer. Okay.
Respectfully, I do not believe it's the size of the feet of boys and girls. I didn't quite understand that.
That messaging makes sense if we're protecting the status quo.
But what you're doing is subsidizing a broken system.
What are the plans to ensure that teacher diversity is institutionalized?
Can you define what a woman is?
And I'll respond, Congressman Clyde, the way I did last year. I'm here to talk about the budget.
We just hope that the administration doesn't defund hundreds of colleges because they think that biological men shouldn't participate in sports with biological women.
And students of color.
Tell the bricklayers and pipe fitters out there right now, you have the floor for 1 minute and 3 seconds, why they should feel good about paying for these student debt relief programs.
As I'd mentioned in my opening statement, I am concerned, and I know many people are, about the proposed Title IX regulation, which, in my opinion, would do grave harm to the safety and the success of young girls and women across this country. Particularly, I'm worried about how this could impact girls in elementary school, for whom these school years are crucial for physical and mental development and building confidence. Under these proposed rules, as you've laid out, the elementary age students would generally be able to participate on school sports teams consistent with their gender identity. And that would mean that a sixth grade boy who simply identifies as a girl could play on the same basketball team as young girls. My question would, when can we expect the department to finalize the Title IX rule?
Thank you, Chair Adderhall, for the question. We know this is a very important issue and important question that many have opined on. We've received over 150,000 comments, and we are working vigorously to move forward on that rule. We know it's important, and we're working hard on that.
Is there things that the department is doing to ensure that a final rule would protect vulnerable young biological girls?
As I said before, the safety of all students is critically important to all of us, and it's important that we work quickly on these rules, and we're working as quickly as we can. I would ask, sir, that you consider the $22 million budget increase that we have for the Office for Civil Rights to help us facilitate the work of not only writing regulation, but also investigating.
How satisfied are you with how states are implementing their chronic absenteeism plans? What would you like to start seeing from states in your department's next round of monitoring?
Thank you for that question. I share, as a lifelong educator, I share that concern. Chronic absenteeism, you're not learning if you're not in the classroom with your peers. So that is an issue that was exacerbated after the pandemic for various reasons. And in our budget, we have proposals that will help address that. We've been very focused on ensuring that states are also what we call raising the bar, are really doubling down efforts on that, and we're seeing some good progress. But to answer your question, we have a technical assistance center that we're focusing on chronic absenteeism. So technical assistance, what's working, what are the best strategies across the country. The technical centers are helping with that.
Would you agree that Title IX was necessary to help establish women's sports because women can't fairly be expected to compete on biological male teams?
Yeah, especially after last week, I'm really proud of what I saw in women's sports. And
please, no filibustering.
Yeah.
Do you agree that that's why we have Title IX?
And yes.
Okay,
and I'm
for input
proud
on the rule, are you seeking input from HHS?
Say that again, please.
Are you seeking input from HHS in this rule?
We work closely with all departments when we're making.
You are? Okay, so are you aware of what Secretary Becerra testified in front of this committee 3 weeks ago when he was talking about women's health and women's health research? Said, quote, "Women's feet are different from men. Their arches are different, but yet they have to wear for professional athletic activity shoes that were designed for men." Would you agree that women are physically different than men?
So I see where you're going with this, and I'm
No,
here
no,
to talk about.
would you agree, would you agree that women are physically different? Would you agree with Secretary Becerra that there is evidence that women are physically different from men?
So, Dr. Harris, I know where you're going with this. I would love to talk about how we can work together to support the
Do you,
students in your
Mr. Secretary, do you agree that women are physically, biological women are different from biological men physically?
I think
This
I-
is a simple question for an educator. You're
think
not
I
going to answer. Okay, let's go on to the next topic. I believe that your proposed Title IX rule could obviously roll back the protections of Title IX. And it's an affront to women in this country. It's an absolute affront that you're even considering a change to that rule, given the Secretary of HHS's testimony in front of this committee 3 weeks ago. Now, let's move on. Charter school grants. In your reason for decreasing it, one of the reasons is so that you'd prohibit program funds going to schools operated by for-profit entities. So if a for-profit entity demonstrates that it can educate a child better than the failing Baltimore City public school system, for instance, where 5% of students are actually proficient at something when they're done, you don't think the federal government should support a for-profit entity that has evidence that they can deliver a better product?
I recently visited a charter school that provided outstanding education, and throughout the course of my career, even before Secretary of Education, I have supported high-performing charter schools.
So if they're high-performing and they're for-profit, what your budget request suggests is that you are unwilling to have the department support them. A for-profit, highly performing charter school. Am I reading this wrong? Because it says prohibit program funds to charter school operated by for-profit entities. Am I reading that right? I mean, unlike Baltimore City school children actually have reading proficiency. Is this correct? Is this what your department wrote?
Sir, I think, to respond to that comment, if you support our budget, we can provide enough Title I dollars to districts to help all students read, which is why I'm here today.
You want to prohibit them for for-profit entities, even if they're highly performing. Is that correct?
I'm a big believer in public charter schools, and no, sir, I do not believe public dollars should go to private institutions.
Even
or
highly
tuitions.
performing. See, the problem in my district is I may not have a public school entity that actually can set up a highly performing charter school, but a for-profit entity might be able to move in there.
Will you commit to ensuring that your efforts to address discrimination in schools will also prioritize rising threats to LGBTQI plus students? And do you believe the additional funds you've requested for OCR will be sufficient to meet this growing need?
Thank you for that question, and I wholeheartedly agree with you that there's been an increase in threats and exclusionary behaviors for students who are LGBTQ, and I need those students to hear directly from me that they should come as they are, and they should feel as welcome as the next student in their school. They should feel a sense of belonging, a sense of being a part of something bigger than them in order for them to reach their potential. Again, all means all. We need to stand up for the students who are being marginalized. Look, we're asking for a $22 million increase, and this will go 90% of this will go directly towards investigations.
What point did you realize there were going to be some real problems getting the FAFSA rolled out on time, and when did you know the department was not going to meet the traditional FAFSA deadlines?
Thank you. I understand the challenges that our students, our families, our universities, financial aid administrators are facing. There's nothing more important right now at the Department of Education. We're working on this around the clock because we want to make sure our students have information that they need to make informed decisions. And let me tell you, Congresswoman, 30 years ago when I was 17 and I was going to fill out the FAFSA, I knew the burden that it would put on my parents, and it was too much.
Yeah.
I never filled it out.
Yeah.
We need to move forward to a better system,
Right.
but we need to do it in a way that gives the students the information in
Sure.
a timely way.
So I heard just a quick response to a remark by one of my esteemed colleagues about what is an affront to the women of this country. Respectfully, I do not believe it's the size of the feet of boys and girls. I didn't quite understand that. But I will tell you what is an affront. An affront is the Republican banning and restricting abortion all over this country. That is what the affront is.
You heard, in my district, I hear from parents who paid for their children's education and feel that it's unjust to say, okay, some people are having their loans forgiven, but they had to pay everything. People who went into the skilled trades who didn't take out student debt and made that decision, and they're saying now I have to subsidize people who chose to take on student debt going to college. I hear from students who, work part-time or took time, in their career and then went back to school. They aren't getting their student loans. Do you see the fundamental injustice in how this administration has, picked winners and losers in this process?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. And I have met with people across the country who have shared different perspectives and listened to them thoroughly. I think my response to that is that messaging makes sense if we're protecting the status quo. We have a very broken higher education system. So many, and as a former school principal who's spoken to students who said, I can't go to college, that's too expensive for me. At 11 years old, this kid who's one of the smartest kids in my school, in front of his father, normalizing, I'm not going to college.
Well,
we have to fix a system,
But
sir.
what you're doing is subsidizing a broken system.
you could make
right?
the same
And you're
case,
creating incentives for people not to do what the families that saved, what the people who made decisions going into the skilled trades. You're incentivizing people to not pay back student loans, and at the same time penalizing and forcing people who did to subsidize those who didn't.
Sir, thank you for sharing that perspective. I don't see it that way. I would feel that the people that received loans, PPP loans, were given support when they needed it most to get back on their feet. We have over 1 million people defaulting on loans, so we have a responsibility to fix it.
Can you please explain to this committee how the $216 million for school safety national activities and the new $25 million investment in the fund for the improvement of post-secondary education helps us reach that goal?
Well, we've seen, even prior to the pandemic, as an educator, I would categorize our mental health supports in schools as an emergency room model. We waited for the trauma to happen. We waited for the student to have an outburst, and then we approached it. And unfortunately, in many places in our country, it became discipline. It's insufficient. We are seeking to transform how we view accessing mental health in our K-12, pre-K-12 schools, in our higher education institutions. Those dollars are intended to develop proactive programming to meet the needs of learners so they can be successful in a way that's supportive.
Why does your budget propose a $40 million cut to the CSP?
Thank you, Congressman. I agree that I've seen examples of charter schools that do exceptional work, public charter schools, and I visited E.L. Haynes recently, a fantastic school. To be very frank with you, the demand hasn't kept up, and I just want to remind folks, the charter school, even with the proposed $40 million cut there, the charter school competitive grant is still the largest pre-K-12 grant that we have at the Department of Education. The demand has really diminished. So in keeping with the Fiscal Responsibility Act, that's a concern that we have.
Well, let me jump in here because when you look at you talk about the size of the budget, less than 1% of K through 12 of the K through 12 federal spending is on charter schools. So that's a very low number based on the demand that I see in my district. Now you talk about the demand. So let me say this respectfully from the meetings that I have with educators, with parents of kids that my kids went to school with, it's evident to me that the slow spending is not due to the lack of interest in applying, but rather the burdensome regulations.
What are the plans to ensure that teacher diversity is institutionalized and that teacher diversity is representative of communities that they serve and, especially, in underserved communities, but we have to be intentional about that.
And we can't keep doing what we've done or we're not going to ever catch up. So thank you for that. I always say our profession should be as beautifully diverse as our country. And right now it's not. And if we're not intentional, then we're not going to make improvements there. So we're taking a lot of steps. The Augusta Hawkins grant, you mentioned it. I was at Bowie State recently, and I saw a program. They had 50 men of color going into the teaching profession, being mentored by former superintendents that are being there, giving their time to help these young men become teachers. And so that was a recipient of the Augusta Hawkins grant. We're asking.
Mr. Secretary, let me just mention, I was a staffer and an
Were you?
intern for Congressman Ron Dellums and had a chance to get to know Congressman Gus Hawkins very well.
that's
He'd be very happy about this.
It's just one of those things that I just felt fantastic because I know that community is going to be better. We're also working on, so there's specific grants to that. We are really shifting how we're thinking about this. We are at the doorstep of another crisis if we don't think about educator shortages. So, and I'm proud to see that California is one of those states that has an apprenticeship for teaching. The days of free student teaching should be in our rearview mirror. No other profession does that. And while teachers get paid on average 24% less than people with other similar degrees, we need to make sure that we're creating a pipeline for teachers to get into the program.
In recent years, we have seen a drastic increase in radical gender ideology being promoted and pushed by government bureaucrats and educators through school curriculums. Pseudoscientists are attempting to redefine gender to include an individual's feelings rather than focus on their biological sex at birth. And our nation's top executive branch officials cannot clearly define what a woman is. So, Mr. Secretary, I'm sure you remember that in our last hearing last year, I gave you an opportunity to answer that question, and I'll give you a second chance. Can you define what a woman is?
And I'll respond, Congressman Klein, the way I did last year. I'm here to talk about the budget and how to support the students in your district.
Well, I think it's very important that you determine that you know how to define a woman. As Ms. Frankel mentioned over there, she wanted to be sure that women had their fair share of funding. If you can't define what a woman is, how in the world can you determine that they get their fair share of funding? If you cannot understand and clearly define what a woman is, how can you make rules that protect women's rights? You can't. So I would ask you to please respect this committee and the U.S. Congress by answering my question.
I respect your role. I respect this committee, and I said I'm here to talk about the budget, and if you have a question about the budget, I'd be happy to respond.
I'm asking you a question, and you're refusing to answer.
Be happy to respond to questions about the budget, which is why I'm here.
You're here to answer whatever questions I want to ask of you, and this question directly correlates to the budget.
We are asking for a $22 million increase for the Office for Civil Rights so that we can.
That's not my question. My question is, can you define a woman?
As I said earlier,
All right.
I am not interested
Okay,
in.
so you're
getting
not
into
interested in respecting the
This
question
is
of a member of Congress.
content.
All right. Your answer is cagey, evasive, and reveals to me that you have an inability to serve and protect the interests of young women, especially women athletes in this country. I hope you realize this proposed rule unilaterally forces schools to allow biological males to participate in women's athletics, thereby threatening to withhold federal assistance from schools across the nation, assistance that is currently used to benefit all students, I might add. So, do you think a woman's safety is in jeopardy by allowing biological males who claim to be women to compete in women's sports?
All students should feel welcome and connected to our schools, and the protection of students is something we take very seriously. We are, as you know, in rulemaking process for Title IX. I can't get into specifics on what our proposal will be. I can tell you that we have had hundreds of thousands of comments that we take very seriously, comments that have different perspectives, which is why it's really important that we listen and we read all those comments before we respond with a rule.
Okay, but you haven't answered my question. Do you think women's safety is in jeopardy by allowing biological males who claim to be women to compete in women's sports?
I believe all students should be safe in school and should be protected, and all students should be welcome in our schools. Again, I see that you want.
Okay, so you're not going to answer my question.
Could
You know,
I
I'll tell you
finish my
something.
response, sir?
I'm very thankful.
Could I finish my response?
No, you're not answering my question. You're filibustering. I'm very thankful that the NAIA, the National Association of Intercollegiate Athletics, has decided to only allow biological female student athletes to participate in female sports. The NAIA understands. They understand the safety issue here. They understand that it protects women's achievements. They understand the hard work of women needs to be honored. And the NAIA understands that they need to prevent the stealing of future honor and accomplishments from women by allowing biological men to take those honors that and hard work that women have worked years and years and years to accomplish, and yet it's not happening. So do you think that biological males who claim to be women should be allowed to use women's locker rooms?
We're in the Title IX regulations process, and you know, sir, that I cannot speak premature to the rules being put out.
I'm asking your opinion. I'm not
I can
asking.
tell you as an educator and as a father, I want to make sure all students in schools feel welcome, seen, and protected. If that, I can answer that. As a lifelong educator, that's something that I fought for, and that's what I'm fighting for as Secretary of Education.
Let's begin with this. How many public schools, let's say K through 12, have you visited in the last 12 months? Just roughly.
In the last 12 months,
Public K through 12 schools.
I couldn't give you an exact number, but dozens.
Ballpark.
I would say dozens. I would say dozens at least. Yeah.
What about charter schools that serve K through 12 students? How many?
I can tell you, I recently visited one. Some of the other schools that I visited might have been charters. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
Can you tell us what is the share of borrowers now repaying their student loans?
I do recall having that information reported to me soon after we got back, and I think the number, I want to say the 60% compared to what it was before. It was maybe 10 or 15 points below, but I don't want to misspeak. So what I'll do, Chairman, is have that information sent to you today.
So how does that compare to the before the pause?
Well, we were dealing with over 1 million defaults before, and we saw progress ramping up. We did implement many programs, sir, to help borrowers who were struggling to make repayment, the Fresh Start program. So there were a lot of new things that we put in place to help borrowers who are struggling get back on. So I can have that information. I have my team reach out.
Okay,
to you with
you can
that,
follow up with
those
tonight.
data.
There have been improvements made. $62.5 billion in student debt has been canceled for 871,000 borrowers. The improvements to the PSLF have been essential in helping us to retain a top-notch public service. How is your department streamlining the experience for borrowers participating in PSLF?
Thank you. So, look, we should be just as concerned about our literacy rates, our math rates, as we were, when the pandemic hit.
Right.
We are seeing recovery with the American Rescue Plan. We recovered a third of the pandemic era learning loss in math, a quarter in reading. Math, twice as much growth last year, reading 5 times as much growth. I'm not proud of where we are, but I just want to paint the picture that the American Rescue Plan dollars, focused money on achievement gaps is critical.
Just to follow up on the Title IX, the NAIA just announced its policy that is not going to allow males to participate in female sports, biological males participate in female sports. And they're numerous. I mean, I think there are over 200 NAIA colleges. Your Title IX rule doesn't in any way threaten their ability to cooperate with federal funding, would it?
So thank you for that question. Congressman Clyde mentioned that earlier as well. As I said before, I'm not sure if I said it when you were asking questions, but we are in the regulation process, which we have, just for athletics alone, over 150,000 comments that we're going to review carefully before we come up with a proposed rule. So for me to be speaking about that, on what impact it would have on the recent rule you made reference to, would be premature.
So, but you're telling me the department, I mean, that's within the range of consideration to basically educationally defund at the federal level institutions that wouldn't cooperate with your mandate to allow men to participate in women's sports? I mean, that's within the range of something you're considering, or that's off the table?
Is your question that whether the announcement that you made reference to this week
Yes.
would impact how our Title IX regulations
No,
would
could
roll
that
out?
potentially threaten their ability to participate in federal education funding, such as student loans, Pell Grants, things like
I
that?
see what you're saying. So again, as I said earlier, we are committed to moving quickly on our Title IX regulation. And for me to comment on a regulation that's still in process when we have the process, we have to go through that. For me to talk about it before it's out would be premature, and I wouldn't want to do a disservice to the thorough work that we have to do to read through the comments and consider them before making a decision.
Sure. I would just hope that the administration doesn't defund hundreds of colleges because they think that biological men shouldn't participate in sports with biological women. I mean, I just hope that, but I'm only one of 150,000 comments, I guess.
Well, with all due respect to my colleagues' concern about the men and the women's sports, which I think is probably not a really big issue in this country, but here's something that you should be concerned about. It's the rights and girls of women and girls to have reproductive freedom. I said it again. I'm going to say it again. Since the overturning of Roe v. Wade, 1/3 of women in this country of reproductive age have lost access to legal abortion. That's about 25 million women.
Why should we appropriate more money for this program, this mandatory program, when we haven't already spent the money that was given during the pandemic for learning loss specifically?
Thank you. And I say this respectfully, but there are many students in Louisiana and other states that are reading well below the level. So those dollars are critically important to sustain efforts of tutoring, summer school programming. And 70% in Louisiana is about average. I said the country's average is 68% ESSER drawdown. But if you talk to any school principal, administrator, superintendent, board member, they'll tell you, because I've been speaking to them, those dollars are being used and they expect them to be drawn down. They're for social workers, reading teachers, additional after-school programs. So they are obligated dollars, they just haven't been drawn down because the work hasn't been performed.
I wanted to just find out, in terms of your administration, what are you doing, short of our legislation passing, to enhance access to STEM and tech education and workforce outreach efforts to underserved communities, especially K through 12 students who are low income and students of color?
Thank you. Thank you for that question, for your work on this, because it is critical. It's critical not only to level the playing field, make sure all students have access to good STEM programming, but quite frankly, if we're going to meet the moment with CHIPS and Science Act, with the energy provisions under the Inflation Reduction Act, and even some of the infrastructure work that's happening, STEM has to be a bigger part of our K-12 programming and our higher ed program. So, going specifically to HBCUs, we're asking for an increase of $35 million to bring it up to $431 million for HBCUs.
Will you commit to providing the members of this subcommittee with the classified briefing on this?
I will have my team get back to you on whether or not that is going to be possible. But for me, transparency is really important, and sharing with you is very important.
I have to say, Mr. Secretary, I appreciate the spirit in which you say these things, but I am disappointed in the response you've given, because it doesn't appear to me that you do take this as seriously, or you don't take the subcommittee as seriously to offer information to us today. So I am disappointed with that.
Sorry you feel that way.
Pushing
Pushing
Mr.
for dollars.
Secretary, I'm talking about the folks that are plunging toilets every day and cutting pipes and laying bricks, that didn't have an opportunity to go to college, and now we're asking them to pay for the education of the folks that you're trying to describe there. Those are different classes. So tell the bricklayers and pipe fitters out there right now, you have the floor for 1 minute and 3 seconds, why they should feel good about paying for these student debt relief programs.
We are not only increasing opportunities for those pipe fitters to have opportunities to get more credentials, to get more pay, and some of the legislation that was passed, some of it in bipartisan fashion, are going to increase the opportunities for those folks that you're talking about. But those folks also have children that are going to school. And many of those folks have children who are saying, I can't go to college because I can't afford it, because it's gotten out of control. We are fixing a broken system. This debt relief work that we're doing shouldn't happen forever, because now we have the SAFE program. So the children of those bricklayers, those who are building our country, those people that deserve an opportunity to be thought about as well, their children are going to have access that they wouldn't have had before the Biden administration.
Mr. Secretary, however, the parents of those children that are laying bricks and fitting pipes have already made their decision. They're into their career, and they're being asked to pay for a different class of folks' education. I find that just tremendously unfair, and I'll be anxious to go back and and play your comments over to the folks back at home and see if you've convinced them.
Happy to work
I
with
doubt
you
it.
to
Thank you.
support those folks.
Again, thank you both, and we look forward to working with you as we continue on through the budget process.
Thank you.
Dismissed.